think that, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until the Democrats are in the majority, which will hopefully be in the midterms. And then we can absolutely bring Elon Musk in, and we can have him under oath, and we can have him tell us about everything that he did.
New reaction today to the departure of Elon Musk from the White House as a special government employee. And joining me now, we have our friend, Florida Congressman and former DNC Chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She is on the Committee on Appropriations. Congresswoman, welcome back to the show. So Musk said he's disappointed in the massive spending in the Republicans' big, beautiful bill because it undermines DOJ's work, even though Musk missed his target of slashing federal spending by $2 trillion and cut only about $150 billion. Experts believe the real number is potentially even lower. Musk said yesterday he hopes to continue as a friend and advisor to the president. What concerns you about his call for DOJ's mission to become a, quote, way of life throughout the government? I mean, if Democrats take over the House in the midterms, should bringing in Musk to testify be a priority?
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Alex, once again. And there's no question that when Democrats take over the House of Representatives and are in the majority, and Hakeem Jeffries is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, among many things that we'll need to engage in terms of oversight over the lawless Trump administration will be to bring in Elon Musk to testify about his illegal, unlawful rummaging around in people's private personal tax information and, invading the Social Security data illegally, and his invasion of private personal data in IRS records. But, what he did this week, Alex, is he said the quiet part out loud about the Republicans' big, ugly bill, where it blows a massive multi-trillion-dollar hole in the deficit, at the same time cutting hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, yanking health care away from almost 14 million people, making the largest cuts in nutrition assistance in American history, devastating cuts, hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to healthcare and cancer research, which is, I'll tell you, as a breast cancer survivor who was able to benefit from the results of research that showed I was much more at risk. I carry a genetic mutation that made me much higher risk of getting cancer and getting it again in the future. Without that, I probably would not be sitting here talking to you. But the MAGA extremists, they don't care. They are much more focused on transferring that wealth to millionaires and billionaires and wealthy corporations.
On Thursday, you made an unannounced visit to an immigrant detention facility in Miami-Dade County, the Crome Center Detention Center. It made some recent headlines after an investigation found 2 inmates died due to questionable medical care after authorities had said it was from natural causes. Describe the conditions you saw and what your visit revealed about the administration's immigration policy.
Well, Alex, I made an unannounced visit as a result of changing the law in an amendment that I passed through the appropriations bill in 2020 that has carried through multiple administrations that allows members to make unannounced visits. And they did, thankfully, let me in to make that inspection. I was there for about 3.5 hours. Saw just about every aspect of the Crome Detention Center. It's the oldest detention center, ICE detention center in the country, and it shows. I'll tell you that as these detainees are being brought in, they are in a massive pile of people crammed in small rooms, forced to eat, sleep, and defecate and urinate in that room, in a toilet in the corner. It is a pile of humanity in multiple rooms. You have a facility built for 882 people that has 1,111 there right now. 2 people died earlier. I asked questions about the details that caused those deaths, and of course, I really got vague answers. I mean, one of the deaths was a Ukrainian man who had a stroke, and the reports from the facility, from workers in the facility, said that they didn't call 911 for 41 minutes. I mean, if you know anything about stroke, time is of the essence. Mm-hmm. The conditions in there, Alex, are nothing that you would want anyone you cared about to be subjected to. More deeply concerning, Donald Trump is obviously not doing anything like what he said. 60% are criminals in that detention, but, a lot of them are low-level crimes. 40% are people who were yanked off the streets, who committed no crime at all, because all Donald Trump is doing is trying to bleach out the United States and deport as many people as he can, particularly in spite of them being from countries like Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba, brutal dictatorships that they couldn't possibly avoid being harmed if they were taken back to their country of origin.
This week, as you know, Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, opened an investigation into the private dinner the president held for the 220 top holders of the Trump meme coin. Ethics experts call Trump's crypto ventures the starkest example to date of Trump seeking to profit off the presidency. Do you support these investigations, even though congressional Democrats lack the authority to hold the president accountable in any meaningful way at this point? I mean, what do you expect the findings might reveal to Americans?
Absolutely. I served for several years on both the Judiciary and the Oversight Committee. Jamie Raskin has the expertise as the ranking member and the staff and members to support conducting the absolutely critical investigations that are necessary, even while we're in the minority. Not only is he selling pardons, one of the attendees at his meme coin dinner it was $1 million table, and then all of a sudden, her son is granted a pardon. He took he's in the process of taking a luxury jumbo jet, total violation of the Constitution, from Qatar, a state sponsor of terror, and wheeling and dealing on hotel deals, has never divested any of his assets, and is profiting off the presidency. So no question, we can't afford 1 minute to avoid shining a white-hot spotlight on the unethical, profiteering that Donald Trump is using the White House, and unlawful that Donald Trump is using the White House to benefit from.
Let me ask you quickly, because I know you held a briefing with FEMA. Tomorrow starts the hurricane season. What are your concerns about what may lie ahead and its ability to handle it?
Alex, FEMA hasn't released, in fact, they pulled back and still haven't released their strategic plan for this hurricane season, which is slated to be above average according to NOAA. I do an annual hurricane briefing every year, and what the concerns that were expressed to questions I asked were that, look, if you go through the kinds of cuts that the Trump administration is planning, they're even talking about completely shutting down FEMA and not doing the kind of reimbursement and recovery assistance that states like mine in Hurricane Alley desperately need. If you're taking away the millions of dollars that have been able to advance the technology and the expertise necessary to make people more aware of storms coming towards them and more accurate predictions of who's in their path, the NOAA experts were very clear that it would be less likely. They would not be able to make the kind of progress we've made as a result of those investments, and people would be less clear and less certain about what danger approached them.
Okay, that is a sobering thought. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, good to see you. See you again. Okay.